economy is in shambles. The government started a number of mega projects, and financing those projects have become really difficult. And the foreign currency shortage is as acute as any other problem. So when you combine the political, the economic, and the security crisis, the thing we propose here, the people in a lot of Ethiopians' mind today, they fear that the state, not only the regime, the state could itself disintegrate is quite real. The government is not in control and is not also willing to move on a path to reform. I propose an approach that probably will avert not only the collapse but also open towards democratic transition. A two-way or a multi-track dialogue is needed. The first is internal dialogue, the second is external. Internal within the ruling party, within the existing regime, external with the opposition. Internally, as I said earlier, the party is no longer one. The party is now 4 different parties, even multiple factions competing. So instead of trying to reimpose the democratic centralism approach, they need to liberalize the political discourse within the party itself. Most importantly, they need to let the state structures function. The constitution is quite beautiful, but they need to let the constitution work. That means the legislative, the parliament need to be allowed to debate policies, debate laws. And we have seen over the last couple of weeks, when they're given opportunity or when they push back and fight, they can actually produce the kind of solution that's needed. They need to let the parliament debate. For example, Ezekiel talked about the multiple repressive laws. The parliament should be discussing and debating and repealing those laws. And also, Ethiopia is a federal state. But the power has been extremely concentrated in the hand of the federal authorities. They need to let the federal states exercise the kind of autonomy granted to them by the constitution. The judiciary, the judiciary has a number of competent judges, but interference from the security branch prevents judges from undertaking their oaths. So the judiciary should be allowed to undertake its job. If you allow this kind of internal political liberalization, you need to simultaneously also allow external dialogue. Ethiopia has pretty much no opposition right now because almost all significant opposition leaders are in jail or exiled. And what they need to do is they need to open up dialogue and negotiation on the rule of the game, on how to transition to an open democracy with the opposition. Of course, to do that, you have to first release them. And the announcement by the Prime Minister and the ruling party about a week ago to release the political leaders and political prisoners is actually a good one. And it is welcomed by most of Ethiopians. However, it has to be done quickly, and it has to be done unconditionally, and it's also the minute they are released, their movement within the country, their ability to organize their members to function properly, to open their offices need to be allowed, and both public and behind the scene negotiation has to happen with these opposition leaders in order to allow democratic transition. So to summarize, as we said earlier, both possibilities of state collapse as well as the transition to stable democracy is there. State collapse will happen if the regime, if the government is continue to resort to violence, resort to force to solve political crisis. As Gail earlier mentioned about this national security document, for first time it admits that the country is facing serious crisis, and the problem is mostly a problem of politics. But their prescription is not political solution. They want to resolve a political crisis through military solution, and that approach does not work. Their argument is we need first to stabilize the country so that there will be a stable condition for negotiation and dialogue. But the more violence you use, the more violence you will invite. The prospect for democratic transition is quite brighter today than probably 2 years ago or 3 years ago for multiple reasons. The opposition or the protest or the resistance, those who seek change, have remained non-violent, which is quite interesting. For most, in Africa and in a number of developing countries, when a state resorted to violence, a response from the youth often is to resort to violence as well. What we have seen with Oromo protests and other protests in Ethiopia is these young people who make up 70% of the population, who are unemployed and who are angry, have resisted the temptation to engage in violence. They have resisted the government's pressure to push them into the jungle, into picking up the gun. And instead, they have relied on a very sophisticated and a very promising non-violent resistance. And of course, as multiple studies show, a non-violent movement has a better chance of producing democracy than a violent or an armed struggle. But another important development that makes us hopeful about democratic transition is an emergence of a reformist element within the ruling party itself. A number of individuals and also factions have openly called for opening the political space for multiple voices. Particularly in Oromia, the current governor and his team have liberalized the political space despite the heavy presence of the military. And having those kind of allies within the government will help those who seek democratic change to exert both external and internal pressure. Towards this, I think particularly the Western governments, the US and Europe, their interest in Ethiopia is very clear. They want Ethiopia to be stable and secure so that it can play a stabilizing role in the Horn of Africa region. Fine and well. If that is the case, their choice is very simple. If they support forces that seek transition to an open democracy, a democratic Ethiopia will be a stable Ethiopia. A stable Ethiopia could be a stabilizing force in the region. But if they continue to pump money and support politically in other ways a regime that chooses to continuously securitize and militarize the politics in the country, the possibility of state collapse could be real, and the collapse of the state and the regime and an increasingly violent confrontation could not only destabilize Ethiopia but also destabilize the region. We are hopeful. We will take questions now.
Okay. Thank you very much for this introduction. I think it was quite interesting. Maybe before to give the floor to the audience, I have two small questions as a non-specialist of Ethiopian affairs. So first remark, since now, these last years, Ethiopia has a pretty good image here in the Western countries because some economic growth and some stability and so on. So, as I can say, it's a false flag, it's a wrong image, you mean, or it was a real economic growth. How to reconcile this this image with the reality, or because here that's a little bit the impression we have, in the mainstream opinion in the Western European or maybe also in America. So what is your opinion about that? And second question, is it a domestic problem or is it an imported problem? I don't know, with some ingerence or from other countries inside the Ethiopian politics, or not at all, because we can see in many countries some outside interference with inside politics. Is it the case or not at all? Second question. And yes, does for instance the Somalian collapse, is it a model, or is it totally different? Because we have also in mind here the case of Somalia, which the state has collapsed totally, or it is a similar danger or not, just to better understand the picture. So I don't know who will answer, or maybe Professor and after you. No? Okay. Please, yeah.
Well, thank you for the questions. The first one is, it's not really the question where there is a high rate of economic growth. Yeah, okay. That's not a problem.
For instance, we just announced here in Geneva the first air link between Geneva and Addis Ababa just today. So which is a sign of kind of good economic relation. I understand.
and a good public relations as well.
Probably,
Yeah.
probably.
Yeah. This problem of economic growth but persistent poverty is not a unique problem in Ethiopia. That is, what we see when we talk about economic growth, that is really economic growth, high rate of economic growth, registered and explained in terms of the GDP. That doesn't say how that wealth is distributed. And that's the point that I was making, that whatever progress that was made in Ethiopia is not widely shared, and people cannot feel it. And that's not really an Ethiopian problem. It is a problem a world over. So there is economic activity. There is economic activity in Ethiopia. There is, as a result of that economic activity, there is growth. Growth is registered. Now, I personally doubt that the rate of growth is 10% or 11%. It's probably in the neighborhood of 7%. But regardless, if people who dominate that economic activity is the party businesses, the military and politics, and the oligarchs, well, you can see why people still protest. In fact, when there is growth and people are not sharing in that, it actually heightens the possibilities of uprising. So that is the GDP growth. There are some also developments going on in Ethiopia. Not only economic growth, there is development. For instance, one example is universities. And that's what the government says. It touts that the number of universities have grown from 3 to 30 or 3 to 50. That may be true. That may be true. But as one eminent Ethiopian academic who had lived in the United States and worked in the United States and American universities, in fact, he's a winner of prestigious award named Gabisa Ejeta. He was told while visiting one of the universities in Ethiopia, he said, just because you have enrolled students and erected buildings, it doesn't mean that you have universities. I am a university professor, and I was educated in Ethiopia, so I can tell you that, and everybody agrees that the standard of education, the standard of graduates, is not the same. That just because you carry a degree, it doesn't mean that you are an educated person. That extends actually into the ruling party. That getting a PhD, buying it up in the market in the United States, doesn't make you a PhD. That extends into the ruling party. So the issue of growth is not even an Ethiopian problem, but this question of how it's shared. The second question was about
domestic or important or
right.
Somalian effect, if yes or not.
Yeah, the third one.
Yeah.
Now, this is about, yes, everybody knows in the world that there had been protests in Ethiopia for the last 3 years. It has now come to international attention because it lasted so long. It's a violent one. Not the protesters, but the government that knew only violence in dealing with protesters. That these protesters actually intruded in this Ethiopia rising narrative and Ethiopia democratizing narrative that they spoiled. So the way it dealt with was with violence in Ethiopia. But the other thing is that they externalized the origins of the protests. That is to say, the protests are not indigenous. People in the country have no problem. They are very happy that there is economic growth, there is democracy. They are instigated by outsiders. This narrative had been foisted on the international media for 3 years. It no longer is a problem because the government itself now has admitted that outsiders have nothing to do with the protests. They actually said, it's not outsiders. The fault is not even people protesting on the streets. It's us. Who said that? Not me. It's the government itself in its last party Congress admitted that. They said, it's us. They said, we got it all wrong. So this is not a question for the international media anymore, since the Ethiopian government itself has admitted the cause for all of these protests are created by the party. Now, I disagree with them that it is only a party problem. No, it is an inherent human reaction to deprivation. Discontent usually produces an upsurge of resistance. So that's what it is. These are real problems. The one thing that I want to say in that respect is the issue that Jawar mentioned. That is, despite the violence, the unprecedented violence, the protesters have remained peaceful. And their demands have been constitutional, legal, and the demands have been saying, restore the Constitution. Let the Constitution function. Restore the federal arrangement. Let it function. These are also supported, the questions of equality, liberty, justice. These are all in, I mean, Geneva should be the place for international instruments of human rights. These are all supported by him. So it's not external. The third is about...
Somalia, what is... with the Somalian collapse,
is that the same? I think there are different dynamics. What led to the collapse in Somalia is not the same forces working in Ethiopia, but the fact that Ethiopia is in that area, and it's not only Somalia, Southern Sudan is not a functional state, Sudan is not a functional state. In that neighborhood, Ethiopia is supposed to be the anchor, the island of stability that is holding the place in some form of stability. But it is in a real danger of collapse. Who said that? The government itself. That there is an existential threat. If Ethiopia does collapse now, because there is really no alternative, it collapses, there is nothing to take over. In that situation, the reverberation of collapse, state collapse or regime collapse in Ethiopia would be felt throughout the Horn of Africa.
On the image building, I think what was happening was this war on terror, with the instability in the area, Sudan and Somalia, and some in the West desperately needed at least one stable country. Yeah. And there was, I think, a fear from the Clinton era onward that if they push too much towards liberalization, two things could happen. One, Ethiopia could completely fold itself into China, or if we force it to open up, if they, for example, support the opposition, it could turn to instability could issue in the country. Therefore, they really propped up the whole idea of Ethiopia rising, but that created a problem in Ethiopia. What it did is it misled the government itself. The government itself felt that I can repress as much as I want, I can implement any kind of policy that discriminates against people, still my Western financiers will continue to support me. And they turned a blind eye to a simmering issue. The good example is Obama went there in summer of 2015. He called it a democratic country, and imagine a liberal man like Obama saying that. And 3 months later, this protest starts. That both the Ethiopian government worked really hard to paint its image positively in the West, but they had powerful allies, people like Bill Gates, professors from universities, these liberal professors who carry a heavy weight with the media, were able to help them. And having a man like Mullah, absolutely, and having somebody like Mullah Zenawi, a very smart guy, it helped. But when he dies, and when the political crisis erupts, that image starts to crumble. Another problem, you mentioned about Ethiopian Airlines. Yes, it's one of the finest airlines in Africa, but it masks the reality inside. That the airlines management is filled by a single ethnic group, and people in the country who for a long time actually prided themselves with that airlines start to say, oh, this is no longer an Ethiopian Airlines, but an airlines of certain ethnic group. You know how ethnic stripes starts. The other question you raised, is this domestic or external? There are times when the Ethiopian opposition received support from outside. That's in the 1980s. The movement right now is 100% non-violent. Therefore, it doesn't need anything from outside. They don't need guns, they don't need training, so they don't need anything from outside. These are young people, men, women, doctors, lawyers, who are doing their job and engaging in a number of nonviolent protests that weaken the government. And for the first 3 years, the government was saying Eritrea, Egypt, and so on and so on. But now they admitted in this security document, they said, you know what? The truth is, outside forces have nothing to do with it, and they are admitting. And as somebody who follows this movement closely, I can attest that the movement really doesn't have any support from outside, and it doesn't need that support because its cost is just quite low. The Somalia type, probably the Yugoslavia type. When you combine a federal state with authoritarian system, the federal entities, the blocks, kind of go separately. So right now, when with this conflict, for example, between Somali region and Oromia region, you see what could happen if the center actually collapses. If the center continues to lose legitimacy and lose grip over the country, and if it doesn't initiate a transition and a dialogue, a reconciliation, that what happened in Yugoslavia after the days of Tito, or what happened in Soviet Union, is the kind of stuff that could happen in Ethiopia. Probably worse because it's the Soviet Union and Russia are surrounded by other countries. These are surrounded by countries that are already in trouble. So that is a likely one possibility, but that's not the only possibility in Ethiopia. There is also a possibility of Ethiopia actually moving towards a democratic federal state. If with the support of a non-violent movement that is refusing to engage in violence, with the emergence of reformist elements within the government, if rapid measures are taken to open up the dialogue and open up the space, the possibility for democratic transition is also there.
Okay, thanks for this precision. Thanks. So I open the floor to, yes, please. Some question. Here you push the button, please. Just front of the...
Okay, thank you. Thank you for organizing this panel. I hope you'll, the press club. I hope you'll continue with that track. And I thank also the panelists for their brilliant expose and much more focusing on real politics than history of Ethiopia, which is pegged on 100 years. And you've told us that the country is ruled by 4 ethnic parties. So, unlike Switzerland here, the states, the federal states, are also delineated on ethnic basis or linguistic basis. Now, in my view, this will hinder the movement of labor and sorry, it hinders. I mean, it prohibits labor and capital. So we can see that the dominant party in Ethiopia taking a lion's share. For example, in Tigray region, we have a lot of industries where nobody is going there except themselves. I mean, working only Tigrayans in those industries. So this kind of ethnic killal system, ethnic killal system, is also a problem for economic progress. So, in my view, the real problem now in the country is where these parties are organized on ethnic lines. Unlike here in Switzerland, for example, parties are organized on ideology and interest basis, Socialist Party or Liberal, etc., etc. But in Ethiopia, it is a Tigray Party, Oromo Party, and Amara Party. This is the root cause, in my view, it's the root cause of, or the major problem of Ethiopia now. What's your take on that?
Thank you for coming. Thank you for inviting us here. In issue of so, as you know, this is a major debate in Ethiopian politics. The way I look at it, there is, of course, history why we have ethnic-based federalism. Issues could have been resolved during your generation in the 60s, but my generation inherited a lot of problems. And we have to find a way to get out of it. The problem is not necessarily just formation of federalism along ethnic lines. When you combine the ethnic federalism with democracy, you'll have a solution. Because federalism assumes there is going to be devolution of power and also democracy. What prevents movement of labor and capital across ethnic federalism is not necessarily because they are ethnicized, but because they are not allowed. If you look at the press release APRF released last week, it deplores, it condemns horizontal relationship, because federation is created, but power is still concentrated at the hand of the central power holders. And there is no negotiation between Oromia and Amhara. There is no negotiation, there is no any political social relationship between the two neighboring states, because the central power holder doesn't want it. If you take India, it's pretty much an ethnic federalism. A number of other countries. If you have democracy and if you have federalism together, you could actually find a way where the two states can find a solution. There could be negotiation between them. There could be, you can create even the issue of identity, for example. There's ethnic identity and country-wide identity. That identity can be created over time through markets, through force of market and others. But what you have in Ethiopia and what led to disintegration of other ethnic federalism says, you put ethnic federalism and you denied democracy, you are sitting in time bomb. So in Ethiopia, what we have right now is a situation where you have a federalism, but it's not allowed to function. Federalism is never allowed to function in Ethiopia. You have regional states, but power remains concentrated in the hand of the TPLF. But if you allow the parties, if you have democracy, and if you have democratic debate, we can have the kind of debate where me and you have it. But if we don't have it, people continue to grow apart. And that, I think, is the problem. And the solution is to democratize it and open the marketplace so that people can actually interact and find what is best for them, instead of one or two guys on top deciding.
The issue that federalism is or ethnic federalism is the cause. I've heard it so many times, but let's keep in mind, you said that don't bother that much about history, but it's the historical problem associated with the creation of the country of Ethiopia that, as I said, in the last 60 years, since to the date, today's 2018, right? 1968, the problem was articulated as the question of nationalities. Federalism is a response to an existing problem. Federalism did not create the problem. It was actually a middle ground choice. Ethiopia has a problem of nation building, as I said, and that is based because we are a multinational country. We speak different languages, different religions. And federalism was a middle ground response, because on the one hand, because the state was facing this problem, on the one hand there is secessionism, that is, let's break it up. On the other hand, there is unitary state that says, forget about all of these problems, that it doesn't exist, simply denying that the problem doesn't exist and wishing it away. Federalism is a middle ground, sensible, rational solution that says we need to remain together rather than break down, but we cannot have a centralized unitary state. That was a problem. So it was a compromise. Federalism was a compromise solution. You only say that it is a problem if you really don't want to tackle the problem of nationalities. So it's not a problem. Second, the idea that federalism or ethnic federal units are not good for economic growth and flow of labor and capital, well, we have it now for 25 years, even longer. Even longer. That is, even under the Derg, there was some regional autonomy. So it hasn't happened. It hasn't happened. We don't have that problem. There is no problem of migration. There is no problem of flow of capital within the country. Humans are Homo economicus. Where they find economic opportunities, they travel. The only problem in Ethiopia is that the central, the Oromia region, is really where the resources are. And honestly speaking, Oromia is the microcosm of what Ethiopia should be, because all peoples from all backgrounds in Oromia live together, work together, and there is no problem of migration or movement of capital and human labor. The third, if this is a problem, if federal ethnic federalism is a problem, well, let's prioritize. We have a bigger problem right now, and then we will revisit. If it is a problem, we will revisit it in due course. Right now, what we need is a peaceful transition to a participatory democracy, a multi-ethnic, multilinguistic, multinational, ethnic, democratic constitutional state. If federalism is a problem, in due time we'll talk about it later on. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. Alors, André, et puis après monsieur. Appuyez sur le bouton.
Alors, j'ai pas de bouton.
Ben, il faut venir devant, sinon on ne peut pas
So
enregistrer.
maybe I'll just sit here.
Okay.
I'll sit next to you. And I push the button. We were talking about education, and you were saying that now there are maybe 30 universities. I understand that they are certainly not internationally recognized and so on. But the key question is, has the general level of education, has it increased in the last 20, 30 years, or has it stayed as it was before? So has it been an improvement or not? The second question is basically, you talked about it, talking about federalism, but is the government avoiding to pass to a more democratic or federal state because it perceives that there is a risk of dismantling the country if you do that? So that's basically the two questions I have.
With regard to education, I think the number of graduates from universities has increased, and that's what you're a higher education rather than education in general. We talked about higher education, university level education. The number of graduates has increased not just because there are state-owned universities whose number has increased, but there are also private universities. So in direct answer to your question, the number of degree holders, certificate holders has grown. The problem is almost 150,000 graduates in the Oromia region, after obtaining a master's degree, don't have jobs. What happens is that they get their degree, and then they go back to their villages to as the Prime Minister told them, mine gold in a very traditional way. I have seen myself a DVM, a doctor of veterinary medicine, who is working in a bar. There is no jobs. That's the thing, that there is no connection between graduation and success. Second thing is, it's the quality of education. If a university doesn't have university professors, doesn't have books, doesn't have laboratories, why do you need them? Then the reason that the government needs them is it's to meet targets. This is a developmental state. They plan and they say we need to meet those targets. So counting the number of graduates is a goal. The developmental state says we have increased the number of graduates. The quality, or whether they get jobs after education, doesn't matter. But in Ethiopia, those of you who are from Ethiopia know that education is the avenue for upward mobility, for success in life. It doesn't translate that way. And we have seen in Ethiopia protest over that question, that university students are saying, why are we even attending classes, since when we get out of here, there are no jobs? And there are other problems with that you have to have a party identity to get jobs and all that. And the private sector is really small. The second question you have to ask about is the government avoiding...
Is the government avoiding federalism because there is a risk that the country will, disappear, or some region may make secession?
I'll be brief on that one. Studies have shown that the government that is in power is, at the core of it, is the Tigrayan People's Liberation Front, which represent about 6% of the country's population. But they won a war with the help of others. They won a war against the military dictator in 1991. So when they came in, as I was saying earlier, because it was an era of democratization, they had to speak the language of democracy. But in fact, they were never committed to the idea of real democratization, because when you have arranged politics along ethnic lines, people would function as in terms of identity politics, that they would vote only for the people that speak their language. That doesn't work well for a group that had captured power through a guerrilla warfare. That the democracy is not in their benefit. It's not to their benefit. Democracy does not benefit them. So there is no way, and this has happened all over the world, where you have a minority in government, democracy doesn't work. I think that's why they're avoiding it.
I think on the education, it's not just higher education. The education in general, enrollment has significantly increased. The number of elementary schools have significantly increased. In the district I was born, there was 2 or 3, probably 2 elementary schools before this government came. Probably today 50 and plus. Yes, the number of kids who are going to school has significantly increased. The problem is the quality has deteriorated beyond imagination. There was a research done by USAID. It showed kids grade 3 and second grade and third grade, when they gave them math exam, only 10% of them could respond on average level. In reading as well, only 10% of them can pass the medium, the middle standard set internationally. Because they wanted to show to themselves and also to their outside backers that they are producing numbers. The reason, and when you go to tertiary education, so kids who are receiving really bad, one teacher teaches 100 students. So the ratio of student to teacher is very, very low, very, very high. And one book is shared by many students. So that has led to deteriorating education quality. When they get to tertiary level, they push them through. So when they graduate with a degree, but not with the knowledge. You have a low degree graduate, who can't write me a letter saying, how are you, my brother? In his own native language. Not in English, not in French, not in any other, not in a second language. They can't. They are not competent. They introduced something called 70-30. 70% of students have to graduate from science, 30 from social sciences. So you have engineers and you have all kinds of people. They come out on the market, they are not employable because they don't